welcome to How to Fix It. Full disclosure, while I'm more of a DC fan nowadays, when it comes to comics, I had no such qualms in my youth. I loved them both the same. When I was a kid, I loved Spider-Man, and I still do now, but now we've got all these other mainstream Marvel superheroes to enjoy on the big screen. Back in the wilderness of early 2000s superhero properties, all we basically had was Spider-Man. And the X-Men, but again, full disclosure, I've never been that much of an X-Men fan. I grew up on reruns of the 90s Spider-Man animated series and reruns of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I read Ultimate Spider-Man and played the video game, and I watched the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Truthfully, as a kid, Spider-Man was probably my favorite superhero. Probably because he was a nerdy kid turned superhero, and knowing how much of a ripoff of Spider-Man the Ted Kord Blue Beetle was, that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about who my favorite superhero is now. But back to Spidey. Now, I don't remember if I saw Spider-Man 2 in theaters. I'm pretty sure the first time I saw it, it was on VHS. But I do remember seeing Spider-Man 3 in theaters, and for me, that was a huge deal. One of my favorite aspects of Spider-Man's character, though more so from the 90s animated series, was the Venom symbiote, and the stuff with black-suited Spider-Man, so seeing it in live action kicked ass. And I remember liking the movie at the time, but I know that, like with most things, the internet has different opinions. Different negative opinions. And in time, my opinions started to skew negatively about this movie too. So, was this a case of just my taste changing as I grew up? Or has Spider-Man 3 secretly been a good movie all this time, and the internet is just mean? Probably a little of both, but let's find out together. This is Spider-Man 3. I'm not going to do a recap of the previous two movies because they've been out for years and you probably have seen them already. And if you haven't, why not? Our story opens and everything is going good for Spider-Man. Crime in Manhattan is down, thanks to Spidey. Peter, Tobey Maguire, is balancing his life. Mary Jane, Kirsten Dunst, is cast in a play on Broadway. Peter even plans on proposing to Mary Jane. Everything's coming up Pete. Well, except that Harry Osborn, James Franco, has been increasingly aloof since he found out that Peter was Spider-Man at the end of the last movie. In case you forgot, Harry has believed that Spider-Man murdered his father since the end of the first movie, so he's a bit touchy about that. And so when Peter heads home after asking Aunt May's advice and getting her ring to give to MJ, Harry, using modified Green Goblin tech and a glider board, attacks Peter in a civilian identity and tries to kill him. During the fight, Peter gets the upper hand and slams Harry around, nearly killing him and causing retrograde amnesia, wiping his mind of Peter's identity and of the circumstances of Norman's death. There's also an asteroid that crashes to Earth and releases a black goop while Peter and MJ sit in the park. Oh no, it's Artemis! Somebody warned Tasha Yar! Alternatively, oh no, it's Ink! Somebody warned Terry McGinnis! Actually, now that I think about it, between Venom and Sandman being in this movie, Spider-Man could actually use the help of his amazing friends Iceman and Firestar to combat his two new enemies. Double additionally, there's a new rival photographer in New York, Eddie Brock, Topher Grace, who is trying to take Peter's place as the Bugle's Spider-Man photographer. Eddie is vying for a staff position at the Bugle that Peter requests, given that he's got seniority, and Jameson agrees to give it to the photographer who can bring him a photo of Spider-Man doing criminal activities. So I guess that office is just never going to be filled. And to round off the already bloated cast, we've got Flint Marko, Thomas Hayden Church, an ex-con who escapes prison to see his sick daughter, but ends up in the middle of a science experiment involving a particle accelerator and sand. And thus he becomes both the Flash's and Anakin Skywalker's greatest threat. The goop stows away on Peter's scooter and goes home with him. The next day, a crane accident occurs and Gwen Stacy, Bryce Dallas Howard, is caught in the collapse after it wrecks a building that she was doing a photo shoot in. I've got a few questions about this scene. So they knew that this crane was going nuts enough that the cops arrived before it did any damage. So they had time to report it to 911 and dispatch a squad car. So why were the nearby buildings not immediately evacuated? This is post 9/11 New York City, people. They don't mess around with buildings falling. Peter saves Gwen and impresses her father, Police Captain George Stacy, enough that Spider-Man is to be given the key to the city. After bad reviews come out of MJ's play, she's let go from the cast, which I also have questions about. Is that how theater works? You work with this actress for months. Months! Because, shows take time with rehearsal and stuff. You get to know her enough that you're at the very least, colleagues. And then you unsummarily fire her via phone call to her agent? Not even a personal call because of one bad review on opening night. I mean, even if it was a bunch of bad reviews, it was opening night. You're not even gonna give her a chance to improve after she read the reviews? What the hell kind of director is that? Sorry, that just really infuriated me. To make MJ feel even worse, during Peter's ceremony, Gwen presents him with the key, and to impress the crowd, Peter decides to do an upside-down kiss with Gwen, which obviously meant nothing to Peter, but MJ is hurt because it was their kiss. And to be fair, dick move, Pete. But everything's not coming up roses for Peter anymore either. After a dinner date with MJ where he planned to propose goes south, despite all the effort of Mater D. Bruce Campbell, and MJ storms out, Captain Stacy contacts him and Aunt May to tell them that they screwed up Uncle Ben's investigation. That guy that Peter confronted in the first movie wasn't actually Uncle Ben's killer. He was just the accomplice. The real killer was Flint Marko. This enrages Peter, and while he sleeps that night, the goop attaches itself to him and turns his suit black. Using the black suit, Peter goes after Marko, nicknamed Sandman, and beats the sediment out of him, seemingly killing him with water. Peter went to all that trouble when all he had to do was sick Hydro Man on him. Waste of time. MJ almost goes to Harry, but comes to her senses at the last minute. Unfortunately, that minute is also when Harry has a hallucination of Norman, which restores his memory. He blackmails MJ into dumping Peter, and Peter, wallowing in his self-pity, starts to use the black suit more and more, despite being warned by Professor Kurt Connors that the suit will amplify negative personality traits. We get the dance scene, which I actually have some thoughts on that I'll go into later. Harry confronts Peter, telling him that MJ loves him, and that's why she broke up with Peter, and Peter gets into a fight with Harry that ends with a pumpkin bomb scarring half of Harry's face. Brock uses photoshopped pictures to get the staff job at the Bugle, but Peter sees through it, and proves it to Jameson, who fires Eddie on the spot. Peter then demands the staff job, which Jameson gives him. Peter also starts to go out with Gwen Stacy, though really only to make MJ jealous. Brock sees that, though, and goes to a church to pray for God to smite Peter Parker. After MJ confronts him, Peter is able to break free of the suit's influence long enough to rip it off in a church bell tower, since the symbiote is sensitive to loud reverberations, and when he tears it off, it falls right onto Eddie Brock, who is absorbed into it. Marko returns and is confronted by Brock, now going by the name Venom, and they team up to kidnap Mary Jane. Peter tries to get Harry to help, given that he cares for MJ too, but Harry refuses. Peter goes in alone and gets his ass kicked, but after Harry's butler reveals that Norman's fatal wounds came from the blades of his own glider, Harry has a change of heart and teams up with Peter. Harry saves MJ, and then, when Peter is about to be impaled by Venom using Harry's glider, Harry jumps in the way, dying just like his father, except for the greater good. After attempting to use a metal pipe as a weapon, Peter remembers the suit's sensitivity to sound and encases it in a cage of sound waves, webbing Eddie and pulling him out of the symbiote. He tosses a pumpkin bomb into it to vaporize the suit, but Eddie craves the power and rushes back inside and is vaporized along with it. Marko tells Peter that Uncle Ben's death was an accident and was ultimately caused by the guy from the first movie who Peter caught, and Marko flies away. Harry is buried and Peter and Mary Jane reconcile, ending the movie. First things first, the music is really good. I know that Danny Elfman had problems working with Sam Raimi, but even with him only consulting on this one, the music was top-notch, and the actors from the first two are stellar. I know James Franco gets a lot of flack for his recent stuff, but he was a great actor on Freaks and Geeks, and I think he's a great actor here, especially given that he plays double duty as both the Harry from the first movie and the darker, edgier Harry from after Norman's death. As are Maguire, Dunst, and especially J.K. Simmons. Seriously, all I ask for a potential Raimi Spider-Man 4 would be 2 hours of J. Jonah Jameson. Even the small Willem Dafoe cameo was well performed, and the new actors are decent as well. Thomas Hayden Church is great. He was great in Sideways, and he's great here. And Sandman has a lot of pathos, especially the scene with Uncle Ben. Even just how his motivation is his sick daughter, it gives him a Mr. Freeze sort of vibe. His bad deeds aren't forgiven, but his motivation makes sense and is understandable. I'm not completely sold on Topher Grace, though. As a counter to Peter, he works. I just can't not see him as Eric Foreman, especially with how crap his life is going. Plus, he's not really sympathetic when his reaction to Peter, ostensibly rightly outing his photoshopped photos, is to wish for God to destroy Peter Parker. In the comics, his grudge was with Spider-Man, outing the identity of a criminal, when Eddie thought he was breaking a big story, which would have helped put his crappy life back on track, when a different guy confessed to him, which I can find more sympathetic, since Spider-Man was acting like a dick to Eddie in the movie, destroying his camera, so wishing Spider-Man dead I'd have let slide. The visuals are stunning. For 2007 and for today, obviously we've gotten better stuff in superhero movies since, but the scene where Sandman reforms, while not totally looking realistic, is artistically beautiful. And there's a lot of good stuff like that in the whole film, especially with all the fight and action scenes, which this movie has plenty of. Sam Raimi made Evil Dead, one of the most revolutionary films in terms of cinematography, so that's not really a surprise. And the story is not bad. I like the way that the film tries to mirror the first movie with Harry becoming the new Goblin, though that's a terrible name. I'd have just made him Hobgoblin, having Uncle Ben connection with Marco, and ending the film on an Osborn funeral. Plus, of the 3 villains, only one of them is actually evil, though I think that Venom shows up way too late in the film. I know they have to establish the black suit, but we don't really get any time to see Venom in action before the climax. But ultimately, the story is interesting, and I can't say that I was bored at any point during the film. There was always something interesting happening, and like Superman Returns, we get a lot of nice, quiet character moments, like Peter watching MJ's show or that talk with Aunt May, along with the scene of Harry's butler telling him what really happened to Norman. And now, this may come as a shock to all of you, and I promise I didn't forget to edit in the what didn't work bumper between the last clip and this one. It's time to talk about the dance montage. There's a college humor infographic that makes a few very salient points about Spider-Man 3 being a great movie, and one of them refers to the Emo Pete scene. And they actually make a lot of sense. The dancing scene that everyone, including myself, lambasts works. Of course the black-suited Emo Pete is a smarmy dick, because Peter Parker's idea of a cool person would be a jaded view of bullies like Flash Thompson. The way Peter acts is the way that a geeky kid sees the popular crowd. Those swaggering jackasses who finger gun at people because they think they're so cool. We've collectively spent over a decade making fun of this, when the scene was never meant to be taken seriously. That's why none of the other characters in the scene react positively to Peter. They all look as weirded out as we are. And when you watch the scene through that lens, it's freaking hysterical. Speaking of hysterical, there's also some great humor in this film. Specifically, and I want to note this, specifically, the scene where Betty Brant tells Jameson to take his pills using the intercom. Amazing. So, yeah, this movie has a lot of good stuff in it. So while I like Venom, Sandman, and Harry Osborn on their own, 3 villains is too much and bloats the movie. The movie is trying to tell 3 stories, and they all come off unsatisfying. New Goblin is fulfilling Harry's arc, Sandman is closing out the Uncle Ben arc, and the Venom arc is 2 arcs in 1, with Peter escaping the influence and Eddie Brock gaining it. But the movie is never able to give any of them the proper time dedicated to them to make them truly great. Apparently, the movie was initially going to have Vulture, but Avi Arad, a big name in Marvel and the producer of the film, convinced Raimi to use Venom because the fans like Venom and he felt that Raimi was relying too much on his preferred villains instead of fan favorites. Never mind that the first 2 movies were critical and commercial successes. Despite that, and the one with the fan favorite Venom is the one that everybody hates. Producers are not writers. Now, Vulture still brings the count up to 3 villains, but given that the story would have probably been very different, We can't say for sure, and it's dangerous to speculate about stuff like that. In fact, the bloatedness of the script was a concern of Alvin Sargent, one of the writers, who considered splitting the movie into two, but couldn't find a way to make it work. I also feel like having Eddie make the fake photos is dumb. I know it was like a commentary on tabloid paparazzos, but everyone already knows that paparazzi are jerks, so any sort of satire falls flat. What if Spider-Man actually did do criminal stuff while under the suit's influence, since, it enhanced negative traits, and part of his redemption is realizing that the public hates him and he has to regain their trust? Maybe part of Harry's redemption could have been helping Spider-Man gain the public's trust again, and that plays into Harry having to accept that Spider-Man has been a hero the whole time. Speaking of Harry, the amnesia plot is wasted. He turns back way too quickly, and all he does is blackmail Mary Jane, who, by the way, he had no reason to be an asshole to, apart from the fact that she loves Peter. I also think that Gwen Stacy was wasted, since ultimately Peter didn't want her. He wanted MJ, and he only used Gwen Stacy to make MJ jealous. Here's my version of the movie. Peter starts out doing the whole hero thing, everything's going great, he's still gonna propose and goes to Aunt May getting the ring, and then, while web-slinging his Spider-Man on patrol, he finds the meteor as it crashes. The symbiote emerges and tries to take over Peter, but he manages to contain it and brings a sample for Dr. Connors to study. The Sandman story stays the same, so Marco resurfaces and fights Spider-Man, we learn he's Uncle Ben's killer, and Peter is distraught, becoming distant with MJ. MJ's life is in the can because she doesn't get her dream role on Broadway, and is reduced to becoming a singing waitress, but Peter can't be supportive because he's doing his own thing. So she goes to Harry for support. Harry is still aloof, but he sees an in with MJ, so he tries to get with her. Unfortunately, she comes to her senses and backs out, enraging Harry, but MJ breaks it off willingly with Peter because he is in a funk and won't let her in. To make matters worse for Peter, during this funk, he's forced into this rivalry with Eddie Brock, a rival photographer who is willing to do whatever it takes to get shots of Spider-Man, putting people in danger like Lois Lane jumping off a building to get Superman for a story. During the night, Peter's emotions run wild, and the symbiote, having made some sort of telepathic connection when he tried to take him over earlier, bursts out of containment and takes over Peter. He finds the newfound power intoxicating and brutally attacks Sandman, same as in the movie. Connors warns him about the danger of the symbiote, but Peter brushes it off. At this point, Harry's story would have worked as a counter to the first movie. Peter develops new powers with a black suit and goes through the motions. Like a new origin, but he gets darker and starts to act more like Batman. Harry, knowing who Spider-Man is, decides to take Spider-Man down. That way he can get the city to see Spider-Man the way he does, as a villain. Peter starts to go too far, becoming the smarmy dancing douchebag, willfully being a jerk to Eddie Brock and using his Spider-Man powers to make Eddie's life a living hell because of pettiness. Harry is the good guy, fighting against the evil Spider-Man and trying to redeem the Goblin name as a hero, since everyone is the hero of their own story. Peter eventually fights Harry one-on-one, and MJ comes in, seeing Peter toss the pumpkin bomb at Harry, and scarring him in her horrified screams, gets Peter to snap out of it, and he manages to break free of the symbiote's influence. Same choke spell scene, because that was from the comics, and it's really good. Eddie Brock becomes Venom, and with the telepathic connection, realizes why Spider-Man made his life a living hell, thus putting his grudge onto Peter post-Smite Prayer. Marco resurfaces again to help his daughter, and Venom promises that Marco will get money if he helps him with one small thing. They kidnap MJ, and Peter goes to Harry, pleading for his help, but Harry lashes out, nearly impaling Peter on his glider, until the butler comes in and reveals the truth about Norman's death, with Peter providing the flashback of Norman trying to kill him and Peter simply jumping out of the way, unable to stop the glider. Upon realizing that they were both fighting their own demons, Peter the Suit and Harry his father's ghost, they agree to team up, fighting against Venom and Marco after getting MJ to safety until Venom kills Harry on the glider while aiming for Spider-Man, the same way that Norman died. Venom's death basically goes the same way, except that instead of just wanting the power, Eddie makes it clear that he wants what Peter has, and the only way to get that is with the powers, and Peter is forced to let him die with the symbiote. Peter confronts Marco, and like I said, Sandman plot stays the same. Same ending, and he goes off to parts unknown. At Harry's funeral, MJ approaches Peter like she did at the end of the first movie, but instead of Peter walking off, they reconcile, and he proposes, and the movie ends with a new shot of Spider-Man swinging around New York just like the first one did. And that was how I'd fix Spider-Man 3. But is it a bad movie? No. While my version is radically different, take note of all the times my version either stayed on the same track, or I actually said the words, this stays the same, that stays the same, because there are good elements in this movie. They're just trapped behind a script that prioritizes having another love interest for Peter and fan-favorite villains instead of expanding on the three main plot lines. We didn't really need Gwen Stacy, we needed more Venom. But the movie is ultimately decent and not nearly as bad as everyone makes it out to be, mainly once you look at the emo Pete stuff with a different lens. Next time, because I want to have some fun, we're going to take a look at another Star Trek Discovery novel, one featuring the character who just might be my favorite character in all of Star Trek. Certainly my favorite character from all the Star Trek released in the last 20 years, Ensign Sylvia Tilly. See you next time. Oh, and in case you were wondering, I haven't seen Far From Home yet. I still haven't seen Endgame yet. Hell, I haven't even seen Venom yet. I am really behind on Marvel. Just roll the credits already. And to be fair, you've heard of Bat Dick? This is Spider Dick.